Hi, folks. We'll give everyone just a moment to join. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar focused on the American Rescue Plan funding opportunities from the National Endowment for the Arts. I am so grateful to Jen and Courtney for the invitation to organize this session on behalf of Art of the Rural, First Peoples Fund, and the NEA. I'm also so pleased to be joined today by Lori Poirier and Autumn Whitehouse of First Peoples Fund, Jen Hughes, Ben Kessler, and Courtney Spearman of the NEA, and John Finn of the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. We're also so grateful to be joined by Congresswoman Sharice Davids and thankful to her for providing a congressional welcome today. So before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Please feel welcome to ask questions in the chat in real time. You can do so by not actually the chat, but the Q&A function here. And the lovely Courtney Spearman will be responding to y'all in real time. And also please keep a lookout for a couple of polling questions from the panelists. And please keep in mind that the webinar will be recorded and available online later. So if you like what you see and want to share it, you're welcome to do so. And feel welcome to say hello in the chat and to ask questions of one another as we move through. So to begin, my name is Savannah Barrett. I use she, her pronouns, and I work as the Exchange Director for Art of the Rural, which is a national organization working to advance rural culture and quality of life through relationships that connect communities, cultivate dialogue, and forward rural-urban exchange. I do my work here in Kentucky, where my family has lived for 12 generations, and where I'm both a steward of 6 acres in Grayson Springs, where my family is from, and currently live here in the south end of Louisville, which is the most diverse zip code in Kentucky. Where I'm calling from in Louisville is the unceded land of the Shawnee, Cherokee, Adena, Hopewell, and Osage peoples. And so I like to begin by saying that while my understanding of my places in Kentucky are incomplete, I make it part of my practice to honor all of those who have come before me in stewarding these places. And I do that because this practice of honoring those who have come before me is an acknowledgement that my contribution to this world is rooted in theirs, and that is the seed that I carry. So I share that because part of the work that we do at Art of the Rural is to plant the seeds of connection. And one of the ways that I do that is by recognizing ancestral contribution and duality and interdependence. So my work at Art of the Rural is often focused on rural-urban exchange. And that's a program strategy that I co-founded with friends at Apple Shop back in 2014 and continue to facilitate with the statewide steering committee. So just in brief, RUX is a statewide creative leadership program that works to build skills and confidence, grow social capital, and build relationships to bridge divides. We've worked with about 250 Kentuckians from 42 counties and 10 host communities, and also recently completed a suite of replication materials available on our website, and are working in collaboration with an amazing group of Minnesotans to pilot a Minnesota RUX in 2022. Beyond this rural-urban exchange work, I also directed the Rural Generation Initiative and was one of the lead organizers for our 2019 Rural Generation Summit, along with our friends at First Peoples Fund and the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production. So I introduced that work, which was supported by the NEA, to sort of help you understand our connections here. And I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to Carlton and Brandy Turner, who are on the webinar today, for their visionary work at SIP Culture, and in gratitude for their hosting our convening in Mississippi. And I want to start with that work so that I can give some context on why this opportunity is so important for rural America and Indian country, and what we as a collective with First Peoples Fund and Mississippi Center for Cultural Production are sort of working towards. So I'll begin by saying that our work together at the Rural Generation Summit was designed to apply a distinctly rural thought leadership to expressing equity and building cultural wealth in rural communities and in Indian country. We began collaborating because we recognized a rapidly changing context for this work, as public dialogue about rural America and Indian country revealed deep complexities and misunderstandings. This national conversation and its subsequent outreach efforts to rural places and to Indian country too often did not include the citizens as equal partners and amplified structural challenges for communities already disadvantaged by a deep inequity in philanthropic support. We understood that cultural philanthropy's massive lack of investment in rural America was similarly experienced by artists and organizations across Indian country and by both rural and urban organizations led by people of color. While approximately 20% of Americans live in rural communities, less than 2% of Arts Foundation funding goes to cultural groups in these places. And while people of color represent 37% of the population, only 4% of that Arts Foundation funding is allocated to groups that are serving or led by people of color. So there's also troubling geographic inequities that reinforce economic and systemic barriers. For example, only 0.4% of the total annual grant making of large US foundations is invested in Native American communities. And in the American South, nationwide foundations invest about 44% less than they do in the rest of the United States. Leah Austin of the Southern Educational Foundation suggests that this low investment is the result of grant makers' discomfort with long-range investment, and is quoted saying that pursuing change in the South means facing some of the country's most uncomfortable and foundational problems. And when the going gets tough, many foundations pull out or fund in ways that perpetuate inequities. So the lion's share of philanthropic investment is continuing to prioritize the wealthiest arts organizations. Just 2% of all cultural institutions receive nearly 60% of all contributed revenue. And it's no coincidence that this 2% of organizations happen to be the wealthiest, all with annual budgets of over 5 million. It should also be noted that this troubling statistic is up 5 percentage points in the past decade. So despite the efforts of many philanthropies to increase equity in cultural grant making, it is actually becoming less equitable. All too often, the same few organizations are benefiting from the philanthropic preferences that were established based on societal norms of racism, classism, sexism, and urbanism. And despite sincere efforts to broaden their audiences, many of these organizations continue to serve primarily white, affluent, urban audiences. And yet, we know how important access is to arts and culture and how important that is to community well-being, so much so that arts participation supports intellectual and emotional development, and communities with rich cultural engagement demonstrate stronger sense of place and self-determination. Cultural well-being is increasingly regarded actually as an indicator of health. So there's no question that we have a long way to go before foundation investments in cultural causes led by people of color and those living in rural America and Indian country will reflect cultural philanthropy's stated desire for equity. But at the same time, we recognize an opportunity to make a case for greater investment in rural America and Indian country, and to underscore the importance of our communities to the health, prosperity, and unity of this country. We see these values reflected in the grant-making strategy of the National Endowment for the Arts. They annually invest about 20% of their grant-making commitment to rural America and Indian country. And they do so because their mission works to affirm and celebrate America's rich and diverse cultural heritage and extends to its work to promote equal access to the arts in every community across America. As we move on today to hear from our partners, I invite you to consider how your work may further the NEA's ability to achieve their mission, and to keep in mind that your connection to communities may represent a unique reach for the NEA. So use that to your advantage in your application by describing how your mission and those that you serve help to extend the support of the National Endowment to more communities across the nation. In closing, I'll say that we at Art of the Rural feel more urgently than ever that the future of our people and the places we all love relies on how we reach across distances of culture, economy, race, and geography, and how we welcome folks to join us. If the future of our country relies on common ground, we believe that rural America and Indian country will lead the way. So in that spirit, It's a joy to introduce my friend and partner, Lori Poirier, president of First Peoples Fund.
Ihani washte, mitakiapi makasi tomni omaniwi, imachiapi kishto. I'm Lori, I'm Oglala Lakota, and I was born and raised on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. I'm calling our city, coming in from Ochatishakoi territory here in southwestern South Dakota, and grateful to be a part of this conversation with you all. And wanted to just say that, First Peoples Fund is a resource for the Native folks on the call today wanting to learn more about the application process, but also that, I think it's really important in the time that we're in now that some of the transitions that are happening, throughout Indian country and through the resources coming into Indian country, this is a really, really important time. We had some good experiences with the National Endowment for the Arts and our work here out in Indian country. We were a recipient of the Our Town grant for the Rolling Res Arts bus. And that bus has traveled 37,000 miles across Pine Ridge and throughout South Dakota and even over into northern Minnesota for another rural conference. And I wanted to just say that, in our work, our collective work in supporting rural and Native artists and culture bearers is integral to the livelihood in our communities. Art embodies Native people's culture, connects us to our history, and brings us strength and resilience and joy. And art is a primary source of jobs and economic opportunity. Our early research with building a creative arts economy, art as an economic engine in Indian country, we published a few years back now prior to launching the Rolling Res Arts bus. Through that research, we learned that, and most of us as Native peoples know that someone's always making art in our house at the kitchen table or wherever, our aunties, our uncles and relatives, and we're always rushing to get something done and working at our kitchen tables at home. So we learned that 40% of the Native artists within the households depend on art and culture for some sort of, income to support the family, the whole household. And 30% of Native people, in tribal communities identify as practicing and potential artists. And then, when well supported, entrepreneurs and community leaders, artists and culture bearers have the potential to be critical drivers for healing, renewal, and in our tribal communities. I know just over this decade of work in our work on Pine Ridge, we've been able to just see the movement of artists and culture bearers organizing across the 9 districts on Pine Ridge, and then even our collective work of our artists, reaching out to extend hand of generosity to support, other artists. So I'll stop there, and I'm going to introduce a lovely young woman who I've known her father and her family my entire life. And her name is Autumn Waidahs. So I just want to introduce Autumn. She's Oglala Lakota, and Autumn runs the Dances with Words and Youth program on Pine Ridge. And she was a part of the very first Dances with Words poetry program that went to the Youth Speaks Brave New Voices competition while she was in high school. And she's gone on now to get her undergraduate degree at Dartmouth, and also from there went on to Harvard, and now she leads our youth work. So Autumn is going to share a poem with you all. Thank you, Plamaya.
Thank you, Tui, Lori, and Savannah for those beautiful introductions that you gave. Hami takiapi, chante washte, nape chuzapi ikshto, Autumn Waidahs, machiapi, nala ko michaje ki, wambli ohiti kawi, machiapi ikshto, wazi ahaha, mataha, nalaha, Edison, New Jersey, awatie. I said, hello, relatives. I greet you with a heartfelt handshake. My name is Autumn Waidahs, and my Lakota name is Wambli Ohitikawi, which means brave eagle woman. I'm originally from the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, but currently living in Edison, New Jersey, on the unceded territory of the Lenape Nation. And I'm going to go ahead and read a poem for you all today, open up this space. As Lori mentioned, I'm the program manager of youth development at First Peoples Fund, and I work with Lakota poets in my homelands in Pine Ridge. And so the poem I'm going to be reading for you all today is from my short book of poetry instructed by Hawi. In Lakota culture, Hawi is the moon. And the poem I'm going to be reading for you all is called Mitakue Oyase. And just to preface the poem, Mitakue Oyase in Lakota language means we are all related, or all my relations. And it's an acknowledgement of all of our relatives. And we use it in our prayers. And it's kind of also a way of knowing in our culture of acknowledging all of our relatives, where we come from, and that those relatives are not only our humans and folks in our family, but two-leggeds and the nature and Mother Earth are also our relatives. So it's that acknowledgement as well. So I'll go ahead and get started. Mitakue Oyase. 1. On August 20th, 2013, I left the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation for New York City, flew into a city where lights on towers looked brighter than the sun. I went through a week of disillusionment. I saw people walk by one another that will never know, hundreds of people turning the other cheek, and I started to wonder, if I was ever hurt, would they come to me? Would they come to me? I saw gardens between buildings with plants desperately trying to find a way to the sun between the dark buildings, wondering what they would feel if they had a home like mine. 2. My home. My home is all the air in the sky, its sunsets that melt my heart into a serenity of sanctuary. I could write 1,000 poems of its beauty. I could tell you about my cousins playing basketball next to Sacred Heart Church, the thunder that booms against the windows while it's raining, and sing to you the songs of my ancestors that I once sang while picking sage in the prairie, taking only enough of what we needed and saying a prayer to thank it for its sacrifice. The Inipi is one of my favorite places. We return to mother's womb like retreating to our beds when we are feeling unsafe. The heat rolling off my back doesn't feel painful. The sweat rolling off my skin does not burn as it should. I pray for tomorrow's day, my grandmother's health, and the future of the children. My mother holds my hand next to me as Unchi Maka teaches us how to breathe again, and we sing. 3. In the Black Hills of South Dakota, Mato Tipila stands before us, watching over the land, the people, above the sky, letting us know she's the closest to the Creator. When I was a senior in high school, I prayed at this sacred site, watched rock climbers try to desecrate as we tried to pray. I never thought I could feel sorry for a white person, never thought I could ask an unknowing question, what tribe are you? If you look far enough, you could remember. Look inside and you will find that you were a person of the earth once too. I watched them climb, wrapping their legs and arms against Mother Nature, trying to feel a spirit that has held my hand in the darkest and lightest of nights. I realized they were searching for our grandmother, for family, and for the earth we will return to. 4. Unchi Maka, Grandmother Earth. Our earth is in crisis. She is crying for our empathy, feeling us strip away her nutrients, cutting down her mountains for mining, drilling for natural gas, and building a black snake beneath her skin until her blood becomes the same color as oil, till her resources run clean. Like humans, she cannot function without her organs. Mini Wichoni, water is life. She isn't happy with us. Our family isn't happy with us. And like a grandmother who isn't happy with us, I'll try to make her proud. I'll try to do what I can. Mitakue Oyase, we are all related. Mitakue Oyase, we are all related. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Autumn. Really appreciate your sharing those words with us today and really providing context for why it's so important that we're gathered virtually today. My name is Ben Kessler, and I'm the Director of Congressional Affairs at the National Endowment for the Arts. On behalf of the Biden-Harris administration, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us. And thank you, Lori and Savannah, for hosting us. I'm honored to introduce a welcome from Congresswoman Sharice Davids. As you may know, Congresswoman Davids is a graduate of Cornell Law School and represents Kansas's 3rd district in the US House of Representatives. When she was sworn into the 116th Congress, Congresswoman became one of the first 2 Native American women ever to serve in Congress. I started at the Arts Endowment shortly after Inauguration Day. And from day one, truly, the Congresswoman and her wonderful staff have been steadfast partners in ensuring NEA funds reach those traditionally underserved by government. As an agency, we are committed to following the Congresswoman's lead towards an equitable recovery for the creative workforce. And I speak on someone who I interact with members of Congress on a daily basis, and I can tell you from a personal perspective, we are so lucky to have her as a champion of the arts, and I look forward to hearing from Congresswoman Davids now.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. And thank you to Autumn Waidahs for kicking us off as well. I'm Sharice Davids. I'm Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin, and I have the honor and privilege of representing Kansas's 3rd Congressional District. Look, I am a big fan of the National Endowment for the Arts and all the work they're doing to bring resources and information to communities across the country. First Peoples Fund and Art of the Rural are also amazing partners too, so a big thank you to everybody who's putting this workshop on today. The goal here is to help identify funding sources and resources that are going to be available to Indian country and to rural America, and to acknowledge the rich artistic and cultural heritage of both communities. Prior to coming to Congress, I worked on economic development across Indian country, including the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. During that time, I learned a lot about how the federal government works, but I also saw how little understanding there is, not in tribal communities, but across the country, about how the policy impacts people's everyday lives. I also got to see how art is an integral part of pushing for self-determination and our future as Native peoples. Art provides us an avenue to connect with our history, with our resilience, with our joy. And we have such a diversity of experience across Indian country. I'm always really grateful to be able to participate and share in that. We also know that art is a primary source of jobs and economic opportunity. The First Peoples Fund showed us that 40% of households on reservations depend on art and culture for income, and that, you know, with 30% of Native folks being practicing artists but living below the poverty line, I know that that's an issue. And then when it comes to rural communities, we know that they're rich with creativity, art, and design. So we're not dealing with an issue of innovation or talent or ambition. We're dealing with an issue of access. And I'm really glad that today's workshop is going to start addressing some of the accessibility issues and help bring those resources. And I'm glad that the NEA, Art of the Rural, and the First Peoples Fund are helping bring that to the people. And I know that applying for a federal grant can be a pretty daunting process, and these organizations are here to help and help get you connected. So I hope you learn a ton. I hope there's some great relationship building, and I definitely appreciate the opportunity to welcome you all today, and I hope to see you all in person soon. Thanks so much.
Great. I think we're going to begin by sharing some slides. Thank you. I think we can advance one, if that's okay. Thanks so much. So as the Congresswoman said, and as you all may know, the process is complicated, and that's why we're here with you today. And this is the beginning of a conversation. There will be no moment at the end of this where you will say, I wish I had asked that question. I'm so mad at myself. if only I had asked that one question that's, gonna create problems for me up until the moment I submit my application. This is an ongoing conversation. Stay in touch with us. All of our email addresses are readily available on our website. Check that out, please. And look for a discipline, an artistic discipline that makes sense for you. We'll get into those a little bit of what they are, but they'll be directors of those disciplines as well as specialists, and they're so looking forward to hearing from you. So again, this is the beginning of a conversation. And it's really our goal for today is not just to discuss the upcoming American Rescue Plan opportunity, but to demystify the National Endowment for the Arts and our application process. We want you to leave feeling like these funds are truly available to you and that you're in a position to succeed when you submit your application. The presentation will provide a general overview of the NEA, so you stay engaged beyond just the ARP opportunity. And then we'll get into the details about the upcoming grants made available by the American Rescue Plan. Go to the next slide, please.
Sorry, give me a second there.
Sure. Well, I can continue to talk as we work through that.
Go for it, Ben.
In addition to our regular annual grant programs, as you may know, the National Endowment for the Arts will distribute nearly $135 million as part of the American Rescue Plan. And of that amount, 40% has been allocated to state and regional arts organizations for regranting through their own programs. So we absolutely encourage you to look for your regional arts organization and your state arts agency, and we'll go over that a little bit more in detail, because this funding you can apply through every available avenue stream, and that includes other federal grants as well. So we will distribute the remaining 60% to arts organizations and local arts agencies, and funding will be available for general operating support, and our guidelines are available on the website that you see before you on the slide. We want to reach a broad constituency, including organizations that serve populations that are traditionally underserved by government. As I mentioned earlier, organizations with small and medium-sized budgets, organizations from rural to urban communities, and organizations that may be applying for federal support through the Arts Endowment for the first time. And we know that if this is your first time, you might require additional technical assistance. We'll provide for you a link to a schedule in which there'll be open Zoom, think of them as office hours, in which you can drop by. No question too small. There'll be a couple of smiling faces, colleagues of ours from the Arts Endowment ready to answer your questions. So again, this is an ongoing conversation and we look forward to continuing to engage with you. And we'll talk more about the specifics of the ARP program and its support for operating costs near the end of our presentation. Our regular annual grant programs provide project support. And we'll walk through the details on our annual programs now to make sure that you're staying engaged with our agency well beyond this upcoming opportunity. And my colleague, Jen Hughes, will talk about some of the work that we've already done and want to continue to build on to engage with you all.
Thank you so much, Ben, and wonderful to be with you all today. Just kind of watching the live results of the poll going through. Give it another minute. Fantastic. Well, I think that our intention is really genuine. We are incredibly grateful to Art of the Rural and First Peoples Fund for being such an extraordinary host and for such a beautiful opening. Thanks to Autumn and Representative Davids. I'm Jen Hughes. I'm with the National Endowment for the Arts with my colleague Courtney Spearman, here to sort of walk through with you all today a little bit of an overview of our agency. As well as to get into the nitty-gritties of the American Rescue Plan funding, and we'll speak about that briefly. So why don't we go ahead and end the polling here? And what I'm really seeing is that there is 2% never heard of the National Endowment for the Arts. Fantastic. We're so excited to introduce our agency's work and really have a heartfelt intention to welcome you into our funding opportunities and programs, and really want to be a resource to you all to succeed. I see about 50% know about us, but don't quite know how the NEA applies to your work. So I hope you really are able to leave this session with an understanding of how your work can be supported or intersects with how our agency works. And we're just so pleased to have such fabulous partners here who are really helping the agency to reach more deeply into both rural America and Indian country. And we're seeing the results on that as well. So I'm just gonna close out the polling. Maybe we can share results with folks and maybe give you a moment there to take a look at that as I sort of move through our presentation. So I just did want to acknowledge, as Lori so generously alluded to, the National Endowment for the Arts has really been committed, specifically since 2016, in deeply engaging and developing a strategy to more equitably serve American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian artists, organizations, and nations really across all artistic disciplines. In 2020, we hosted first of its kind national convening of Native artists, elders, and organizational leaders. And this convening was co-hosted by our federal partners, National Endowment for the Humanities, as well as another extraordinary nonprofit, Native Arts and Cultures Foundations, to really help to inform key takeaways and recommendations as to how both philanthropy and the federal government and other government can really support the work of Native artists. So I'm also just pleased to share that in April of 2021, we conducted our first ever tribal consultation as it launches the development of a tribal consultation policy for our agency. And we have our next tribal consultation call, which will take place the week of August 9th. I believe that that date was just confirmed, August 10th at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So we'll have Courtney share into the chat a link for how you can learn more about that. And also, I just wanted to—
Sorry, Jen, this is Courtney. I'm sorry to interrupt. There's a black box on the screen. I don't know if there's another app that's open or something that we can.
Here,
No, that went away. Whatever just happened.
It was the poll. Sorry about that. Thanks for calling that out.
And there's still one at the top, but at least we can see the main. Well, now it's back.
I'm not going to touch anything.
Scroll over. So if you avoid
the
mouse scrolling over, it seems to come up only when you do that. So I think you're good now.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Thanks for interjecting.
Yeah, sorry, Jen, thanks.
And I just also wanted to acknowledge our National Heritage Fellows Program, which has really recognized recipients' artistic excellence in supporting their continued contributions to our nation's traditional arts heritage. And we're so pleased to share that Anita Fields, Osage ribbon worker, was recognized this year in 2021. Okay, let me just see. Go to the next slide. Also, we've had a deep commitment to engaging rural communities, but we know we can always do better. And we really hope that you leave here today seeing the NEA as an accessible resource to fund and support your work. Through our Our Town Creative Placemaking program, which is actually open now, we'll speak briefly about, as well as through our Citizens Institute on Rural Design program, which is really focused on enhancing the quality of life and economic vitality of rural America through design, arts, and culture. So just want to put that program on your radar as well. So let's just get into a little bit about the National Endowment for the Arts. As a federal grant maker, we fund arts and culture projects. So that is specifically our bread and butter of the ways that we support organizations and their incredible work throughout the country. So on the left side of your screen right now, you will see the types of organizations that are eligible to apply for funding. Eligibility is open to tax-exempt organizations, including 501c3 nonprofits, units of state or local government, including local arts agencies and educational institutions, as well as federally recognized tribal communities or tribes. On the right side, you'll just get an example of the types of things we are not able to fund in our regular project funding. General operating support, but we have that in red with an asterisk because we're going to specifically speak to the American Rescue funds and how that is actually an eligible cost in that program. But in our general grant making programs, it's really always a percentage of time and activities associated to a particular project itself. We also are not able to directly support or fund individual artists, but we want to see artists, culture bearers, designers really brought into the project budgets with funding that goes directly to them via project support. So we have a whole full list of a lot of other materials up on our website, but I'm going to kind of move quickly through some of these high-level slides just to introduce you to the agency. And as Ben alluded, we are here to answer your questions well beyond our time here today. So there are certain requirements you must meet in order to be eligible to apply for an NEA grant. Must be a nonprofit at the time of the application, or be a unit of state or local government, or a federally recognized tribal community. You must also be able to demonstrate a 3-year history of arts and cultural programming. You don't need to be a nonprofit for 3 years, but you must have 3 years of arts and culture programming history. All of our programs, sort of our regular annual programs at the agency, require a 1-to-1 non-federal cost share match. The exception to that is the American Rescue Plan funding, which we'll speak about in a moment. And we certainly encourage in-kind support that can be really matched through donations of space, donations of time, materials, etc. So we really work with our applicants and ultimately awardees to make sure that they can meet that 1-to-1 match requirement. So just so you can sort of see a peek behind the curtain and really get a sense for how we adjudicate applications at our agency, our grant review process includes 3 levels of review. The first level of review is a citizen panel, which is made up of experts in the field. That includes all of you on this call who are working directly in sort of the arts and cultural space, as well as lay people. And we define layperson as a person who is not directly working or employed in the arts and culture sector. And all of our panels are diverse in terms of geography, gender, ethnicity, and expertise, as well as the artistic disciplines that they have that experience in. After we receive recommendations from our peer review panels, we take it on to our National Council on the Arts for their review and approval. And that is the presidentially appointed body of our agency that then forwards on its recommendations to our chairman of the agency. We're going to just leave up a slide at the end as well, just inviting all of you who might be interested in serving as grant review panelists to really see the inside perspective of this process. So please, if that is something of interest to you and your work, we encourage you to put your name in the ring and volunteer for that service. And lastly, just one thing I'll comment on, one of the things that we do as a federal agency is provide panel feedback. So panel feedback is always available to applicants. So if you apply and are not recommended for a grant, we encourage you to reach out to our staff so that they can really be of help and assistance to give feedback from what resonated with the panelists, what things they might have questions or concerns about, with the hope of really building the capacity of the organization to go after grant funding in the future as well. All right, so I'm just going to flash this up on the screen. We have various funding categories at the agency. What I'm really going to focus on today is just giving you a little teaser about our grants for organizations programs. I think that's most relevant to folks on this call. So let's keep moving along here. But before we do that, I just want to acknowledge our state and regional partnerships. The NEA distributes 40% of its funding directly to state arts agencies and regional arts organizations, and that is by law. And it's really important for you all to know your state arts agencies as well as these regional arts organizations because they have regular funding opportunities. And it's particularly important in this moment because they have also received 40% of the American Rescue Plan funding that has gone to our agency. So I imagine many of them are underway in developing grant guidelines and constructing their opportunities, which you all should absolutely tap in addition to the NEA direct grants that we'll talk about. So these are our 3 main buckets of programs. We have Challenge America, Grants for Arts Projects, and Our Town. You'll see we have a deadline today for the Grants for Arts Projects category, but these are annual recurring deadlines. They're roughly the same timing year to year with a slightly different date. And I'll just acknowledge that our town is currently open if that's of interest to you. So just to give you a teaser, Challenge America, this is primarily sort of our gateway opportunity into the agency. It supports small organizations who are focused on extending the reach of the arts to populations that are underserved. Underserved is defined by legislation, and as agency policy really refers to those whose opportunities to experience the arts are limited by geography, ethnicity, economics, or disability. All awards in this category are $10,000, requiring a one-to-one match, and the deadline is typically in April each year, so keep an eye out for that. This is really including an abbreviated application, and we provide really robust technical assistance to those first-time applicants to the agency in this category, as well as others. Next up, we have Our Town to fund and support creative placemaking projects. We've had extraordinary projects that have taken place in rural communities as well as Indian country. And this program has an upcoming deadline of August 5th. If you're interested in this program, we'll be sure to share out a link to a recent, more in-depth webinar to help prepare you for that application, as well as being accessible to answer any questions here. And what I just want to acknowledge when we talk about creative placemaking, it's really sort of a big tent of invitation. And in the most simple definition as to how we talk about creative placemaking at the agency is really about arts, culture, and design projects that strive to strengthen local communities. We talk about creative placemaking as when the arts, culture, design are deliberately integrated into these efforts and ultimately lay the groundwork for systemic changes that sustain the integration of arts, culture, and design into local strategies. We do have a couple additional requirements for the Our Town program. They require a partnership between a nonprofit 501c3 and a local or federally recognized tribal government. So there are some details of that program that we are happy to share in more depth if that's of interest. And then I think it's also really important for you to know of our standard program that's offered year after year, twice a year, our Grants for Arts Projects category. These applications are submitted directly to one of 15 discipline programs at the agency at either the February or July deadline. And funding is available to all stages of the artistic process, including creation, presentation, exhibition, arts education, as well as services to the field. And these grants require at least a one-to-one federal match, and awards range from $10,000 to $100,000. And I think it's important to note that the project timeline for these grants, as well as Our Town, can be up to 2 years. So here's just a flash up on the screen of our various discipline programs. Again, kind of the first step connection to the NEA. You can certainly reach out to Courtney or me directly, and we'll help you navigate to the appropriate discipline. All right, but what you're really here for today is to talk a little bit more about the American Rescue Plan Awards. These are grants for organizations that are specifically in the range of $50,000, $100,000, or $150,000 grants that will be reviewed and considered for recommendation at one of these requested amounts. We are explicitly encouraging first-time applicants to apply for this type of support, really with the genuine intention of incorporating the principles of equity, access, and inclusion to making sure our creative and cultural economy can really recover from the incredible year and a half that we've all jointly experienced. I think it's important for you to just keep in mind to select a grant amount that is reflective of your organization's size as well as internal capacity. You can request up to support for 2 years of operating expenses, and applications will be reviewed for the recommendation at the requested amount only. So whichever amount you choose, keep in mind the review criteria, which we'll turn to in a minute when crafting your application, to make the best case for support. And I think we heard at the outset, you all are working in incredibly important and compelling communities that we really genuinely hope to reach with this operating support. So we're looking forward to those applications. Let me get
Hey, Jen, this is Courtney.
Yes.
Just briefly to interject, several folks have submitted questions around how to pick which funding amount to choose. So I'm hoping, I'll say out loud, I think we'll address that as a question towards the end of our time. So we'll help you understand the nuance of that a little more, a little bit later in the presentation.
Great flag. Yes. So let me just quickly run through this just to give you the overview, and we'll make sure we stay on beyond that 1 p.m. Eastern time stop time to make sure we get to all of the questions that folks have. So just to note, support for the American Rescue Plan is limited to any or all of the following. The application is really short relative to our other grant applications, and you should be very focused specifically on these buckets. Salary support, full or partial for one or more staff positions, fees, stipends for artists and or contractual personnel as they provide for specific activities as part of the organizational operations, facility costs that are listed up there, costs associated with health and safety supplies, as well as marketing and promotion costs. And I'll just say not one cost is preferred over another. It's really up to your organization to choose which costs to include in the budget. What makes this most sense in this application as to why they are important in relation to the review criteria. So really think about where the funds may make the most impact for your organization or fill a gap that is not currently being funded in other sources. So here's the review criteria. This is something you should spend a little bit of time with, really sit with, because this is how the review panel is going to assess your application. The significance to the mission and core work of the applicants, the ability to carry out an award as shown by the alignment of the budget and other resources with the goals and requirements of this funding opportunity. And these last two bullets are as appropriate. So depending on how you think about structuring your application, the potential to have an immediate impact on the arts workforce, or the potential to serve and or reach individuals who opportunities to experience the arts are limited by ethnicity, economics, geography, or disability. And I'll just emphasize that this last point, you all are really uniquely positioned to speak really deeply into the ways that you are serving individuals who fall into this category of whether it be by geography or other factors. So keep that in mind. Okay, so we have a lot of great frequently asked questions on our website. If you have something already underway, do you have an NEA grant currently? We saw some of the folks responded in the polls, they do. You can absolutely apply for this federal funding. You just want to make sure that you're sort of keeping project costs separate. And I think that a couple other things, work samples, which are traditionally required for other grant opportunities, are not required for ARP applications. And the difference between a project-based grant and a general operating grant. So I think this is a really important one that folks get hung up on. In a project-based grant, all of the costs must relate specifically to the execution of a project. But in our operating-based grant, which is the American Rescue Grant Awards we'll be making, eligible costs are not tied to a specific project. So there's a couple of mechanics that you want to keep in mind and sort of get started on right now. You're going to have to make sure that you are registered with DUNS, SAM, and grants.gov. For those of you who have applied to the agency before or for any other federal funding, you likely already have this set up. If you're doing it for the first time, I would encourage you to get started right now. We have lots of great resources on our website. And lots of really detailed descriptions of how to sort of follow up with help, whether that be with NEA help or some of these other services. You're going to submit part 1, which is well in advance of the August 12th deadline. That is really part of the process that we don't have a whole lot of control over as a federal agency. It's sort of mandated through grants.gov. But it's critically important to submit well in advance just to work out any snafus or technical issues. And then we will have part 2 materials to the applicant portal that will be due, we'll have, but in the second half of August, and I'll share those dates with you momentarily. So we want you to be in touch. We're going to be sharing these slides, so don't get hung up on all the details up here. This is also all available on our website. Courtney and I would really love to be your guides into the agency, so you can reach out directly to us to kind of get started and make sure that we slot you into the right points of contact. And we're going to be hosting a whole series of sort of open informal office hours where you can come, ask your questions, talk to a real live person virtually. We also have lots of folks responding to emails on a daily basis to make sure that your questions are getting answered. And just a reminder, we have some other things that you're going to have to jump through, which is our grants.gov and sam.gov that you want to get registered on, flashing up sort of the contact information here. But again, I think the easiest way to navigate through all this is to just go onto our website, and we'll make sure to follow up with some very pointed links so you can kind of get started. And then you'll ultimately be completing part 2. This is for the NEA hosted application itself. And this is where you'll submit the bulk of your application, which are really the specific project budget, as well as a response to some of the questions related to the operating expenses that you'll be putting forward. Okay, well, I'm going to round out and close, and then we will spend ample time on questions for those who can stick around past the hour. We want you to be in touch, beyond the singular opportunity to really be part of the NEA family, and we welcome you all into that space. And one of the greatest ways to really keep abreast of all that's happening at our agency across disciplines is to really sign up for our newsletters. So please subscribe so you can be alerted directly from us as the agency about opportunities that are rolling out. And I am very genuine in this invitation to serve to be a panelist. If you haven't served in this capacity before, it's a great way to get an insider perspective as to how recommendations go forward within the NEA, and to sort of see this process from the inside out. So I would encourage you to connect with us if you are interested in reviewing grants. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen, take a breath. I know that's a lot of information, and pass this over to colleague John Fenn to share a little bit about what's happening at the American Folklife Center and Library of Congress.
Thank you very much, Jen. And I want to thank Lori and Savannah for inviting me to come speak very briefly on a new opportunity we're launching. Two caveats: it's not affiliated with the American Rescue Plan grants funding. It does come from private philanthropy via the Mellon Foundation, a gift they gave to the library recently to launch a program called Of the People. And I put in a link in the chat. It's the blog that we're announcing all of the programs affiliated with this funding opportunity. The specific program that the American Folklife Center is launching is called the Community Collections Grant, and we're building it right now. We're going to open up applications soon, I hope. We're going to have a lot of support materials. The best way to find out about that, though, is to follow that blog, to subscribe to it. You can also contact me personally. I'll put my email in here. But this grant program, we're going to offer 3 years of funding to promote to support 3 years of 12-month-long projects. We're going to hope to do about 8 to 10 projects per year at about $50,000 each. Eligibility is going to be open to individuals and small nonprofits. And these are all going to be cultural documentation projects. So allowing communities to engage in self-determination and self-representation by telling us what's going on with them culturally right now. We'll also be offering some training. If you are not trained in cultural documentation or ethnography, we're going to help support that. But we really want to open up through this Of the People initiative, the opportunity for communities and individuals to represent themselves in the library's collections. We have a lot of collections in the American Folklife Center documenting cultural groups and communities in a diverse range of ways that have come to us, donated by folklorists and other people, but we want to hear from communities themselves. We want to know what's going on right now. A couple of examples of the kinds of projects we're imagining is exploration of a community festival or other culturally meaningful celebration, seasonal or periodic documentation of institutions or gathering places that are important in communities, community-centric reflection on cultural forms or practices that have emerged in the last year or a few years, as well as longstanding cultural traditions that maybe are still going on now, and we want to see and hear what's happening. Oral histories of neighborhoods or other kind of geographically delimited communities are going to be of interest too. Wide range of things. These are project grants as opposed to operating grants, as Jen noted. And I will also say that the library is not typically a grant maker. And so we're dipping our toes into this because of the generosity of the Mellon Foundation. So we're learning as we go, but we want to learn with you all. We want to invite people to apply, especially first-time applicants. We're trying to align our application with federal guidelines and regulations, but also try to make it as accessible and open as possible. So we can engage in co-curation and co-stewardship with the communities. The collections will eventually come back to the library for us to help share in order to support public knowledge and diverse cultural engagement. But we also want to work with communities to make sure that they can keep copies of the collections in their own local institutions. So this is an ambitious and exciting opportunity. Again, I don't want to take up more time than I was allotted, which I'm very grateful to be able to share this. Please do get in touch with me through my email or follow that blog and look for announcements. There's a whole range of activity that's coming out of this initiative. But again, the piece the American Folklife Center is focused on is a community collections grant program that will allow communities to document themselves and share that with a broader public. So I will kick it over to broader Q&A and just note that I'm available to answer questions for a little while too, if there are any.
All right. Well, I think that we have a lot of great questions that are coming in. Hopefully folks have been able to follow along the Q&A posting that Courtney will do. And I think we're going to just dive in and stick around for the next half hour to answer questions. I did want to just pass it back over to Savannah to close out our formal presentation, and then we can dive into the great questions you all are already posing.
Thank you so much, Jen. And I just am really grateful to First Peoples Fund and to the NEA for partnering to design this opportunity today. And to Lori, Autumn, Jen, Ben, Courtney, John, and Congresswoman Davids for your collaboration with us. Most of all, we'd like to share our gratitude to all of you as attendees. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope you'll keep in touch. And wanted to, mark this moment as a time that you could exit the webinar if you would like. But if you have additional questions, we'd like to stay on as long as possible, to just respond to as many of you as possible. So thank you so much for joining us. If you're on your way out and if you're staying with us, let's keep going. I'll hand it back over to Jen and Courtney.
Thanks, Savannah. Well, I'm going to let Courtney chime in here in a moment, but I think one of the questions that I've seen sort of repeated throughout is really about how do you decide which grant amounts to apply for with the American Rescue Plan funding, and just some tips and ways we've been responding to this. So keep this in mind, panelists will be evaluating applications based on the review criteria, which includes the applicant's ability to carry out the proposal. So to that end, you want to keep in mind your organization size, your internal capacity when selecting one of the allowable grant amounts and crafting your application. And I'll be totally transparent, we do not have a formula in place based on your annual organizational budget that determines how much you can or should request. So really selecting a grant amount is solely your decision. So a few things to keep in mind, you can submit up to 2 years of support. So if you want to extend that support out over that period, that's totally fine and appropriate. Courtney, do you have anything to add to that question, or Ben, any other thoughts there?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that this part of the application and no part of the application is meant to be a gotcha question. We're not looking to trip you up or you're worried about, am I asking for too much? To Jen's point, there's an amount that's right for you. And we provided the different funding levels with an eye towards flexibility. As you may know, thinking back to a year ago in the CARES funding, those opportunities were flat at $50,000. And we were mindful of the fact that that amount doesn't work for everyone. So please, when it comes to this question, when it comes to any questions, just encourage everyone to stay in touch. And we will do everything we can to make sure that you're in a position to succeed once you're ready to apply.
And I think just emphasizing, we certainly want you to see this opportunity as something can respond to your organizational needs in this moment. And also, if you haven't applied to us before, really to tap our other opportunities as well. We want to be supportive, not just in this flurry of a moment of getting the American Rescue Plan funds out the door, but really in sustaining your work throughout our grant funding opportunities that we have throughout the year and that are annual and recurring. Courtney, do you want to lift up any other questions that we're hearing time and time again? And feel free to keep dropping them in there, and we'll respond to some of those live right now.
Sure, yeah, there's been a lot of questions, which is great. We've answered about over 30 questions. A lot of questions are around eligibility. And so Jen, maybe if you want to just get into maybe a little more nuance around who's eligible, I think around our universities and colleges, do you have to be an arts organization? And one little piece I'll throw out that I added in the chat as well is in terms of whether you have to be an arts organization, not explicitly, if that's not the only thing you do, that's fine. You just need to be able to show that you have done some arts programming at least once a year over the course of the last 3 years or so. We realize a lot of orgs also had to change plans during COVID, but you don't have to only be an arts org, and you don't have to have that be the primary thing you do. You just have to have some arts programming that you can point to that's relevant for an arts opportunity. But Jen, you may have more you want to say about that with other eligible groups.
I think that was a great summary, Courtney. I think just going back to one of our earlier slides, and we'll certainly be sure to share this presentation with you all. And we also have this information up on our website, is that you must be a nonprofit 501c3 organization with at least 3 years of programming history. So again, you don't have to be a nonprofit 501c3 for 3 years, but you have to at least demonstrate that you've been operating programming over the last 3 years or for a minimum of 3 years. And also units of government, so certainly, and federally recognized tribal governments as well. So those are all the eligible entities to apply. And what you really want to focus on in this piece is sort of those operational expenses to sustain your arts and cultural programming. So be really explicit about that, be really clear if you aren't a mission-oriented 100% arts and culture org, to really focus on the arts and culture work that you are doing in the application itself. So there is clarity and alignment for how the panelists will review and assess your application in the pool of applicants we receive.
Jen, we had a question about reporting. If you want to just very briefly describe what's involved in the reporting process.
Sure, great. And if you want to get into the details of that, we have a grants management handbook up on our website. But I think the essence is this is a federal grant. I think relative to other federal opportunities, our reporting is quite light. So I just want to emphasize that. But you certainly will have to keep very clear documentation of your expenses throughout the project period. So that's up to 2 years, depending on how you decide to sort of position your project period. We do require a final report. It's quite a light lift, just a couple pages sort of documenting the work that you did in alignment with that. And again, if you are a first-time applicant to the agency, a first-time federal awardee, there's staff like Courtney and myself who are super accessible to really help make sure that you fulfill all the requirements of your federal grant award. And we're being really mindful of that as an agency on the whole, and how we sort of support those folks who might be coming in for federal support for the very first time.
I know Courtney has shared it in the chat multiple times, but there will be scheduled Zoom office hours that will look a lot like this, but you'll just have to register, drop by to one, drop by to more than one. Our colleagues are really looking forward to hearing from you. It will be sad if they're sitting in a Zoom room by themselves, so hope you'll have the opportunity to drop by, and we'll put that link in the chat once again.
Jen, there was a request about project, or Ben, about project versus operating costs, and kind of how to distinguish what should be in this opportunity application versus our other funding opportunities. I was going to pull up the sort of 4 buckets of kind of funding, or of eligible costs, but I don't know if you guys want to say anything more about that.
I think I'll just emphasize that in this American Rescue Plan funding and these awards, this is a really unique moment for us to explicitly support operating costs. As I mentioned in our other funding opportunities, we are supporting project-specific costs. So you could come in for support of 100% of a staff person to sustain your arts and cultural programming and work. You can come in for support of your marketing and promotion of your arts and cultural activities that your organization is doing. So I think that those are kind of the things to keep in mind, that you are really limited in the American Rescue Plan funding to those operational costs, the 4 buckets of programming that we shared. And I can go back to that if that is also helpful. Give me 1 minute. So salary support, full or partial for 1 or more staff positions, fees, stipends for arts and/or contractual personnel to support services they provide, facilities costs such as mortgage, principal, rent, and utilities, costs associated with health and safety supplies, and marketing and promotion costs. So that is explicitly the American Rescue Plan support. Whereas if you look at our grants for arts projects, our Town funding opportunity, and Challenge America, these are for more project-specific activities. So perhaps to put on a festival in your community, you would just include the cost associated to that particular activity in those proposals. So hopefully that provides some clarity.
And I think those are just, thank you, Jen and Courtney, for that. I think these are examples of the kinds of operational support that's covered, but remember that this is relief from COVID-19 pandemic, and we want to make sure that these funds are reaching you so you can reopen your doors, rehire those staff, bring back staff on. So I think the kinds of things that make sense for your organization. We just want to provide examples. But again, think of it as COVID relief dollars to make sure that you come out on the other side of this, better than you were before.
Great. There's been a couple questions around around the budget, specifically. So what is cost, I guess just a basic question around what is a cost share match, recognizing this opportunity does not require a cost share match. But generally, if you ask NEA for, say, $20,000 to do a project, you need at least $40,000 in costs, and you need $20,000 of your own matching funds to meet that. So it's sort of like your half and our half, but your budget needs to show both halves. And you can match through other donations, through other grants, as long as they're not federal. You can match through staff time. You can match through donated time or volunteer time, or in-kind goods or services or space, discounted services. So there's a lot of ways to meet the match, but this particular opportunity does not require a match. So you can ask for 50, 100, or 150. And you don't have to match that in this case. I don't know if we need to say anything more about that, but that was one that's come up in different ways a couple times.
That's great, Courtney. And I just see restating the deadlines for part 1 and part 2. So the important part 1 deadline that you all need to keep in mind is August 12th. That is where you are submitting your SF424, which is a form that you'll have to complete via grants.gov. And we really encourage folks to do that well in advance of the deadline. So for example, if you wanted to get off this call right now and start pulling together that form, that organizational form, and submit it to grants.gov, we would highly encourage that. The other materials, so your project budget, or excuse me, the operating cost budget, the narrative, your key support personnel, the other mechanics of the application to round out your proposal will be due later that month through our grant application portal. So you can submit that grants.gov portion early and then just pull together all your other materials. Part 2 is sort of broken into 2 tranches. And we've done this just because we know there's a large amount of folks that will be applying and we don't want to overwhelm the system. So group A through L, so if your organization begins with the letter A through letter L, you will be submitting the rest of your application's materials on August 19th to 25th. That is when the grant application portal will be open for you to respond to those specific questions. If you are group M through Z, meaning the start of your organization begins with the letter M through Z, you'll be submitting it August 27th to September 2nd. They will all be merged into a singular review process, but that is just the way that we can best manage on our side to make sure we don't run into any overwhelming of our systems here. But the important thing is that August 12th deadline. If you miss that, there is absolutely no alternate path to submit for funding in this American Rescue Plan opportunity.
Ben, there's a question that maybe is best for you around whether we would do this again, recognizing there's such need. I think I know what the answer might be, but as our congressional representative or our congressional liaison, maybe you have nuanced language for that.
Sure. I think, we're mindful of the tremendous need in the field. And while we're honored that Congress thought of our agency highly enough to appropriate $135 million, we recognize that we will not be able to meet the need, across the country. And, I think that members of Congress, and you would have to encourage you to reach out to your own member of Congress and describe the need and the role that the National Endowment for the Arts and perhaps the regional arts organizations and the state arts agencies play in the financial health of your organization. I won't speak to, what the future holds, because I think if someone tried to do that when it comes to either COVID or Congress, they'd probably be making it up. But would just encourage you to, be in touch with your member of Congress, be clear about what this funding opportunity means to you. And if you've received money from the National Endowment for the Arts, I would again ask you to communicate what that money has meant as we all try and move past the pandemic.
One question about how we're scoring the applications, and I can talk very briefly to how we do that in our usual grant opportunities. It's basically a score for artistic excellence and a score for artistic merit by each panelist, and those scores get averaged, which determines a ranked list, which is what we use to determine our funding. But Ben, I don't know if that's what we're doing for this opportunity, and that may not be information that we've been given yet.
Jen, do you?
I was just going to say the most important thing for you all to hold is we'll have like a consistent scoring system across all applications. Typically that's range 1, not competitive, to 10, like absolutely exceptional, has to be funded and supported. In this category, since our review criteria is really condensed, and this is for operating expenses, I would say just make sure you are sort of hitting the review criteria and how you sort of present the significance to the mission and core work of the applicant organization, your ability to carry out an award as shown by the alignment of the budget and other resources with the goals and requirements of this funding opportunity. So keep in mind, we're the National Endowment for the Arts, so we are looking to support through these funds arts and cultural activities, sustaining the staff in those positions. And then I think there's the two other, as appropriate, if you decide to really make the case as to how this has a potential to have an immediate impact on the arts workforce, our review panel will be assessing that. And again, as appropriate, if the potential to serve and or reach individuals who opportunities to experience the arts are limited by ethnicity, economics, geography, or disability. So I'm just going to send you all back to the review criteria, think deeply about that. Whether we have a 1 to 10 scoring system, or I think in the past we've also have used like 2, 5, 7, 10. That is what it will be based on. We'll have that. What you see is what our review panelists will see when they go in to score the applications. So hopefully that helps. And it looks like, let's see, so several organizations will be applying from your county. So if we can spot opportunities for collaboration and initial indications of interest and haven't quite found each other yet, can you help us to connect with one another? I think that is a really excellent question. I can say that aligned with sort of getting the word out there around the American Rescue Plan funding opportunities, we're thinking deeply as a federal agency in how we can really support very purposefully, acknowledging that we're seeing projects from all across the country and serving in that convening role. So that is to come. Always be sharing those suggestions of what is really helpful and useful to your community, because we're listening and we're also simultaneously forming ways that we can ensure that we sustain the momentum of this moment to be really responsive to the needs of our constituents.
I saw a question about the 40% of federal funds going to state arts agencies and regional arts organizations. So that's correct. The question asked whether the state arts agencies would be developing their own programs, and that is in fact the case. And we would encourage you to check out the state arts agency that makes sense based on your location. And you may apply, but you should check out the state's guidelines, but chances are you will be able to apply for every available funding opportunity. That means with us at the NEA, means at the regional, at the state, and if applicable at the local level. The only caveat we put in there is you can't double dip for the exact same dollar. But you could, for example, receive mortgage funding for mortgage costs in January from the NEA and mortgage costs from the State Arts Agency for February. So they could be associated costs. They can't be just literally the exact same costs.
There's a question that's actually two different people have posed around fiscal sponsorships. We don't accept applications for fiscally sponsored projects or activities or organizations. So if the sponsor has their own organizational costs, they can apply, or the orgs that they work with can apply, but the orgs have to be a nonprofit 501c3 applicant. So bottom line, we can't fund fiscal sponsorships.
And just to clarify our definition of fiscal sponsorships, so that is really just a pass-through entity or organization that passes our funding through to individuals or another organization. Now, if an organization is programmatically involved in overseeing the execution of the project activities, then that wouldn't be a fiscal sponsor. We have that definition spelled out really clearly on our website, and just want to mark that nuance because I think some folks may define it slightly differently. Well, it looks like maybe we've answered all the open questions. So
Calling
maybe
once, calling twice.
maybe we close it out from here, but I think just genuinely emphasizing this isn't your only shot, your only chance to connect with all of us. If you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, like, oh, where do I even begin to think about how my work fits into the NEA, certainly reach out to Courtney and I directly, and we'll be sure to share our contact information. If it's really to get some nitty-gritty questions answered around the American Rescue Plan funding opportunity, I would encourage you to sign into those meetups where you can just ask a live person those specific conversations and specific questions that you might have pertaining to your application, or feel free to shoot us an email because there are lots of folks triaging these questions all the time. But hopefully this was a good introduction to the work that we do, and hopefully we'll be able to see your faces soon and really hope to see some great applications from the folks on this call. We really appreciate you sharing your time with us, and